there, and welcome back to another House of the Dragon video. And today we're going to be talking about the latest episode to drop, episode 3, Second of His Name, which follows up from the last episode with yet another time skip, this time of about 3 years, and also follows off from the two major cliffhangers that last episode brought. The first being the king's impending marriage to Alicent Hightower, and the second being Lord Velaryon seemingly throwing in his lot with Daemon to wage war upon the Stepstones. And it was a pretty good episode this time, a bit slow in parts, a bit silly in others, but overall still a lot of fun. And so with all that being said, let's jump into the episode properly. So we start off the episode following the war in the Stepstones, where the Crabfeeders seemingly won a victory over the forces of House Velaryon, burning their ships, taking their loot, and of course, brutalizing their prisoners by hammering them to stakes and feeding them to crabs. Whew, not really any moral ambiguity here, is there? These dudes are just straight up evil. And the king honestly is being a bit of a dickhead by not going all in to get rid of this freak. And yeah, more awful torture to some random sailor before Daemon arrives on Caraxes to save the day. Incinerating hordes of enemies and saving our wounded soldier before accidentally crushing him with his dragon. And hey, it was dark, it's not his fault. Bad luck to that guy though. Whew. Anyway, this whole scene was pretty awesome, and really just encapsulated how unstoppable a dragon is. They're really living weapons of mass destruction. But I also like that they aren't shown to be unbeatable. The Triarchy can't fight them conventionally, so they have to use the caves. They hide their foot soldiers whilst taking potshots at Daemon with arrows to make him fly off before he's too badly wounded. It's actually rather smart. Anyway, Daemon flees, and we cut to a feast at King's Landing. I'm very glad to see that the king has his priorities in order. Also, look at all that food. Ugh, unhygienic much? All that cooked meat just sitting out? That pork looks very sweaty. Whew, get ready for that food poisoning, my lords and ladies. We then see that Aegon's been born, and that Alicent is quite heavily pregnant with yet another child. And already, Lord Hightower is telling his younger brother Otto that Aegon has a kingly presence, and then pressures his brother to ensure that the king names Aegon as the new heir. And honestly, I found this whole scene rather interesting. To me at least, it seemed like Sir Otto was more than willing to have his grandchildren be princes and princesses, and that's it. And that whilst he may have liked to have his blood be the future king, he is resigned to Viserys not replacing Rhaenyra at this point. But then his brother's the one that pushes him to not take no for an answer and try to persuade the king that this is the right course of action, to ensure that a half Hightower one day rules the Seven Kingdoms, to further the prestige of their own house. Hell, the dude even calls Aegon our boy, as in our grandson, when he's just the great uncle. And he also definitely talks down to his brother quite hard and implies he has to do better to defend their rights. Guess this guy's the true power behind Otto Hightower at the moment. It's nice to see how layered it all is, and just how many competing parties are getting involved. The party's then interrupted by the arrival of Tywin Lannister, who says that he brings urgent news from the Stepstones, with Viserys, the active and intelligent king that he is, brushing him off again and again and telling him to bother him in a few days. Because at that point, the festivities will be at an end. So yes, let's ignore the active war zone and go hunting. Woohoo! Seriously, this is a Robert Baratheon level of apathy. Tywin then presses on to try and get the king's support and fails hard because Hightower argues against intervention and Viserys rages that he can't find Rhaenyra. So yes, the birthday party's gone to shit pretty quickly and he clearly doesn't care that his people are dying in the Stepstones. And so we move on to where Rhaenyra is hiding, in the Godswood, with a musician who she's forcing to play the same song over and over again while she reads. And I wonder how long that poor dude's been stuck there playing that one song. Anyway, Alicent approaches her to try and get her ready for the hunt, but is pretty much rebuffed in that attempt. And in her attempt to try and mend things between them. And you know what? I do like this dynamic, and you can't help but feel badly for everybody involved. On the one hand, Rhaenyra feels betrayed, and fair enough. Her best friend married her dad and has a son with him who could usurp her claim as heir. And then on the other hand, women in this world have literally no agency. It's not like Alicent could have told her father to shove it up his ass. He controls her life. She could either try to marry the king and live a comfortable life as queen, or get married off to some random person who might be truly terrible. Really was a lose-lose there. And honestly, I think she made the right choice not to defy her dad. We then move on to an awkward family carriage ride to the hunting camp, where the tension can be cut with a knife. And Rhaenyra begins to display that she's feeling quite bitter about her position and her feeling like she's expendable to her father, that he has his prized son now and he doesn't need her anymore. And then of course there's the promise that she's soon going to be making him a grandfather. I really do enjoy his character, because at times he does seem so awesome, and then at other times He just sucks, doesn't he? And he also just can't read a room for shit. It's honestly quite amusing how inept he can be socially. But anyway, the family arrives at the camp to the thunderous applause of the assembled nobles and their retinues, and after Rhaenyra is once again snubbed, we cut away to the main pavilion, where everybody's sitting around enjoying wine and cakes and whatnot. And it's here that we learn some gossip that a Stormlands noblewoman has been abducted by the Triarchy and sold to a pillow house in Lys. So, forced prostitution and slavery. Yep, these are the people that Viserys does not want to fight. What a hero! A bunch of old ladies then decide to pick on Rhaenyra a little bit and needle her about the war and about Daemon, and then talk shit about the king putting his head in the sand and ignoring the fact that the Triarchy and the Seven Kingdoms are fighting a proxy war through the Velaryons and the pirates. And that honestly, sooner or later, the king does need to get involved. Rhaenyra, showing an impressive talent for making friends and not alienating powerful allies, insults Lady Redwine, an important noble family from the Reach, and shuts down any criticism regarding her father, her uncle, and the sea snake. And look, I get it, but still, publicly shaming her in front of all those people probably isn't the best way to go when you're trying to maintain your spot as heir to the throne. And the silence after that really was deafening. We then get a look at Lord Jason Lannister, Westeros' current biggest eligible himbo, who basically proposes marriage to Rhaenyra straight away, in the worst possible way, trying to convince her that life as a trophy wife would be awesome. Dude's honestly like Prince Charming from Shrek come to life, so lovably hateable. This interaction, of course, prompts Rhaenyra to rage at her father for the audacity of trying to sell her off to one of the great houses, with him raging back at her, calling her as arrogant and conceited as Lord Lannister, and that she needs to do her duty just like he had to do his duty, to both the kingdom and to their house. And I mean, it's easy for him to say though, he got to choose his wife, and not have dudes like Jason Lannister thrust upon him. But anyway, after he's made a scene in front of the entire tent, they're interrupted and kind of shamed by Sir Otto, who tells them that a white hart stag's been spotted in the woods, whilst Rhaenyra storms off and jumps on a horse, with Sir Criston in pursuit. And after a bit of a trek, he manages to catch up with her and she vents to him about her problems with her father, while he tries to cheer her up with an offer to murder Lord Jason. And so she decides that now she wants to have a ride through the Kingswood with her brave knight of the Kingsguard, who in turn sort of gives her a gentle reality check as he tells her that whilst her life might seem hard now, there are thousands of people across the realm who would gladly exchange their life for hers. And that while she thinks she has no power or relevance, he reminds her that he was barely more than a commoner, and that she raised him to the Kingsguard. She gave him everything he has. And thus, he thinks that shows that she has more power than she thinks. We then have a scene of the king going out on his hunt and feeling deer shit with his bare hands to test whether it's fresh or not, before we see Otto start to try his hand at some subtle manipulation, aiming to plant the idea of Aegon getting named heir to the throne. And honestly, whilst I said it was subtle, it's not. He's such an obvious schemer that it feels like even the king's starting to cotton onto things. And at this point, it feels like the king is definitely regretting getting remarried. That look on his face as he heads back towards his horse and thinks nobody important can see him is quite telling. He's so depressed. We then cut back to the main tent where Viserys is holding court and comes face to face with the dipshit that is Jason Lannister, who gifts him a spear and then bumbles his way through an attempt at getting the king's blessing to wed the princess, and simultaneously incurs his wrath by assuming that Aegon would replace Rhaenyra as the heir, and thus, after being severely humbled, he beats a hasty retreat, likely cementing him forever as a member of the Greens going forward. Otto then tries his hand at getting a betrothal set up between baby Aegon, 2-year-old Aegon, and the 17-year-old Rhaenyra. At least I think she's 17, so yes. That wouldn't be very gross at all, would it? Ugh. Anyway, he too gets humbled by the king and beats a hasty retreat. And being pretty pissed that his son's birthday's been ruined, Viserys does the very relatable thing and gets utterly smashed, before being approached by the best of all his advisors, Lord Strong, who's probably the only person who actually cares about the future of the kingdom at this stage. He doesn't push forward his own agenda, he doesn't belittle the king, and he just tells him how he thinks that Viserys can be the best ruler he can be. And this time, he makes it clear that a Velaryon betrothal for Rhaenyra would definitely be for the best, and would ensure that Corlys remains loyal. But not before that he implies that the royal family should probably be aiding the Velaryons and Daemon taking the fight to the pirates in the Stepstones to ensure that Sir Laenor survives. So Viserys, thankful for some actual unbiased advice for once, gives him a pat on the shoulder and stumbles off into the night. Which brings us back to Rhaenyra and Sir Criston, who are camping out in the woods for the night. Sir Criston begs her to let them go back to the main campsite, but Rhaenyra refuses to return, and instead continues to brood, asking whether Sir Criston thinks that the realm would ever accept her as the queen, with him replying that they have no choice. Not exactly a vote of confidence if you ask me, but okay. And then a boar comes out of nowhere and knocks Sir Criston on his ass before trying to go after Rhaenyra. And somehow, she's able to hold it back. I mean, the boar sent Sir Criston flying, and yet she holds it off with her hands. Also, surely his legs are broken. That thing hit him hard. But yes, they team up to stab the boar to death before we return to Viserys, who's still brooding, still drinking and staring into the depths of the bonfire. He's approached by his wife and he begins to lament his life choices, and he tells her that he named Rhaenyra heir to protect the realm from Daemon, that he killed his wife with an obsession with prophecy and a desire to see a son on the Iron Throne, and that when he named his daughter heir, he never expected he was going to remarry at all, and then go on to have a son. And thus he wonders, was his vision of the future wrong? Was it just a dream and nothing more? Has he done all this for nothing? We then cut to the next day where they've managed to subdue a stag, but not a white hart stag after all. Perhaps not a great omen for Aegon. A sign that Aegon should not be his heir, shouldn't be the king. And then we have an uncomfortable scene where the king spears the stag and it squeals and writhes. Eek. And who actually finds the white hart? Why, Rhaenyra, of course. So clearly, even the gods of Westeros think that she should be king following her father. And this scene made me wonder, with the whole divine right sort of thing they're setting up, I wonder if they're going to keep that story point that she ends up actually being quite a terrible heir. Are they going to keep that, or are they going to change it to make it far more clear cut? In the book, almost all of his potential heirs are terrible. Either Rhaenyra, who's proven herself to be a bad heir who makes bad decisions regularly, his eldest son, who's a fat loser with STDs and no brain, his next daughter, who is married to said STD petri dish, his son after that, who's a violent, angry edgelord, or his last son, who seems cool but is so far down the line of succession that nobody would ever accept him as king anyway. Something tells me there's going to be a lot more scenes where Viserys drinks himself into a depressed stupor in the future. Rhaenyra then returns from her own private hunt covered in boar blood, much to the shock and consternation of the court, except for Harwin Strong, who likes what he sees, which spells disaster going forward, but no matter. On we go. Back to King's Landing, where Otto tries to get inside Alicent's head and push forward Aegon as the heir to the realm. Also, what the hell's going on in that painting in the background? Goodness me. I'm clutching my pearls over here. Anyway though, back to the conversation. He tries to turn Alicent against Rhaenyra and tells her to convince the king to name Aegon heir. But when she does go to the king, she doesn't do that. She just gives him good advice about dealing with Rhaenyra and then tries to convince him to send aid to the Stepstones to help Daemon and the Sea Snake. And honestly, it's going to be sad when she starts to fall in line with her father, because right now, she's not really hateable in the slightest. Also, Viserys' fingers. Oh! Guess the Maester was not able to save the digit. And then the next one either. They look gnarly. And so he listens to his queen and sends off word that aid is coming to fight in the Stepstones. Before he begins to backtrack a little bit, and argues with Rhaenyra about trying to find her a husband, until she finally reveals that the root of her insecurities comes from the fact that she thinks he's going to be replacing her as heir, and then he'll sell her off to a lord in the far reaches of the kingdoms, where she can remain out of sight, out of mind, for the rest of her life. But he doubles down and says that she's not going to be replaced, and that she is his heir, as his oldest child. Aegon's not going to go ahead of her in the line of succession, pretty much trying to set up absolute primogeniture as the law of the land for royal succession, as opposed to male preference. And you know what? I think this is well within his rights. What's the point of being king if you can't change a few laws? Although, maybe giving her a seat on the small council would be a prudent move at this point. After all, he can always invent a new position because, once again, he's the king. It is his council. He then argues with her again about getting married before he tells her that she can choose her own husband. But she has to choose, if only to ensure that her succession goes off without a hitch. He then assures her that whilst he did originally waver on whether to supplant her as heir, that now he is certain that she will be queen after he dies, that she will sit the Iron Throne. We'll see how long that lasts. And then we cut to the war in the Stepstones, where it isn't going all that well for House Velaryon. Their ships are toast, and the pirates won't quit, and they can't root them out. Thus, after a brief argument, it's decided that they need to bait the crab feeder in committing his entire force, and thus walking into an ambush. And so it's decided that Daemon should be the one to do it. Of course, there is dissent in the ranks because they're losing the war, mostly from the Sea Snake's brother Vaemond, who believes that they're losing because of Daemon, and thus they need the aid of the king. So yes, Somehow I doubt that this guy is going to get along with the Rogue Prince at all. And speaking of getting along with the Rogue Prince, a messenger from King's Landing arrives and gets beaten with his helmet for the crime of bringing word that Viserys is coming to steal his glory, simply by sending 10 ships and 2,000 men to help. Poor guy, I don't think he deserved to get beaten like that. But anyway, to ensure that he gets the victory before Viserys' forces arrive, Daemon immediately agrees to the plan and rows over to, I guess it's Bloodstone Island, and puts down a peace banner so that the crab feeder will come out and fight. And I must say, crab feeder's looking mighty crispy these days. Anyway, Daemon fakes them out and attacks them under the banner of peace, but since these dudes are monstrous war criminals anyway, I feel like they deserved it. And then Daemon does a little bit of a silly charge across the beach, dodging dozens of arrows until he is eventually hit and cornered, but then saved by Sea Smoke and Rhaenyra, as well as the entire Valyrian army, who've appeared out of nowhere with nobody noticing at all. Guessing they don't have watchmen or anything, but yeah, for the most part, the battle was cool. A lot of shaky cam, but that's okay. I enjoyed Rhaenyra cheering like he just scored in a sports game as he incinerates the soldiers, and I liked that everybody was wearing helmets for once. Also, killing the antagonist off screen, that's pretty shit. I mean, it's such a cool shot to have Daemon drag his mangled corpse across the beach, but it would have been nice to actually see them duel as well. I wanted the satisfaction of seeing this sadistic piece of trash get sliced and diced. But still, for the most part, I think the sequence was a lot of fun. It was just annoying to not have that big confrontation that I feel like the entire Stepstones storyline was building up to. But yeah, that's where the episode ends. And it was a very good episode, I thought. My only problem is that now we're starting to get into some things that are stretching credibility. Like, I know, there's dragons, how could that be credible? But Rhaenyra being as strong as a charging wild boar, or Daemon's Action Man run, doesn't kill the fun for me, but I prefer that kind of stuff is kept to a minimum. But anyway, those have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the episode? You like it, hate it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and let me know.